The evolution of the washing machine, as demonstrated in this barn, is a representative example of this changing domestic life. For many centuries, sailors used to place their clothing in a cloth bag, tie the bag to a rope, and throw it overboard, letting the ship drag it for hours. The principle was simple: force water through the clothes to remove the dirt. But in the household before running water and electricity, washing clothes took a staggering amount of labor. To wash, boil, and rinse a single load of clothes could take 50 gallons of water, which had to be hand-carried from a pump or well. Hand-wringing, rubbing, and lifting the clothes could expose women to caustic substances in the soaps. The whole process for a household's laundry could take an entire day or more of back-breaking labor. In 1846, a patented washing machine imitated the human hand moving cloth over a washboard by using a lever to rub the clothes between two ribbed surfaces. This machine was sold in the U.S. as late as 1927. The first electric clothes washers, in which a motor rotated the tub, were introduced into America about 1900.
Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, the idea of the Industrial Revolution was that it was the work of some geniusy inventors who created machines used primarily in the textile industry, but also in mining, that eliminated blocks to assembly line production, and then everybody was crowded into factories, and the new brave world opened up. In fact, one of the most interesting books, and sort of great classics that's still in print, was written by an economic historian at Harvard who's still around, called David Landis, a good book called The Unbound Prometheus, which was basically that. And some of the inventions that I briefly describe in your reading, the spinning jenny, etc., refer to that. Well, and then that kind of analysis led one to concentrate on England, where the Industrial Revolution began, and to view industrialization as being a situation of winners and losers by not going as fast. Now, that analysis has been really rejected greatly over the past years, because Industrial Revolution is measured by more than simply large factories with industrial workers and the number of machines. And the more, and this is the point of the beginning of this, the more that we look at the Industrial Revolution, the more that we see that the Industrial Revolution was first and foremost an intensification of forms of production, of kinds of production that were already there. And thus we spend more time looking at the intensification of artisanal production, craft production, of domestic industry, which we've already mentioned, that is people, mostly women, but also men and children too, working in the countryside, and that industrial, the rapid rise of industrial production was very much tied to traditional forms of production.
I suppose you wouldn't expect perhaps to find a mathematician in a museum of historical objects, but actually the objects that I've been drawn to in this museum have quite a lot of mathematical significance. These Neolithic stones discovered in Scotland, dating back 5,000 years, are probably the first examples of humans exploring the concept of symmetry. And that's what I do as a practicing mathematician. I spend my life trying to understand what symmetries are possible in nature and in mathematics and abstractly. And here, I've got a connection going back 5,000 years to people who are already trying to understand how can I arrange patches on the side of these stone balls in a symmetrical manner. One of the intriguing things about these stones is that we don't actually know what they're for. They might have been for divination, trying to predict the future. They might have been part of a game. They look very much like dice, but we don't really think there's any game associated with them. Maybe they were just for chucking around. They're very nice in the hand when you hold them. Or maybe they were symbols of power in the clan. I suppose that's why I like them, because we don't really know what they are. If I had a theory about why they were doing this, it would be that actually they were starting to be mathematicians. And that here we see the first example of abstract thought at work, that these weren't for a purpose. Mathematics is a great subject, created a lot of the technology around us, but mathematicians, we create our mathematical objects for the joy and the beauty. So it would be lovely to think that these didn't actually have a use, that they were just really a celebration of what's possible.
The term tidal wave is often inaccurately used for a tsunami. Tsunamis have nothing to do with the action of tides. A more accurate term is seismic sea wave. There has to be a disturbance of the Earth's crust to produce a tsunami. Large earthquakes with epicenters under or near the ocean are the cause of most tsunamis. Volcanic eruptions and undersea landslides are also responsible, but unless accompanied by movements of the ocean floor, their effects are usually localized. Possibly this was true about the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. A tsunami was responsible for most of the deaths caused by Krakatoa, yet this tsunami did not sink any ships. It did wash away several coastal villages and kill more than 36,000 people. Tsunamis work in complex ways. Some pounce on coastal settlements like large breakers. Others produce a gentle wave that floats buildings off their foundations. But then a violent backwash may sweep buildings and people out to sea. The tsunami that wrecked Hilo, Hawaii in 1946 was so forceful it folded parking meters. It caused needless deaths when people returned to save their belongings and got caught between waves. The deeper the water, the lower the tsunami and the faster it moves. In the open ocean, it travels at about 700 kilometers per hour, but being sometimes no more than a meter in height, a tsunami often passes a ship unnoticed. This is what happened in 1896 during a catastrophic tsunami in Japan, which was the result of an undersea earthquake. Thousands of people were drowned on shore, while fishermen far out at sea didn't notice the waves passing beneath their boats. But when they went home, they found their villages destroyed. The word hormone is derived from a Greek verb that means to excite. Hormones are found in all multicellular organisms and function to coordinate the parts of the organism. A hormone is a chemical signal. It's produced by one part of the body and is then transported to other parts of the body, where it triggers responses in cells and tissues. The concept of chemical messengers in plants first emerged from a series of classic experiments on how plant stems respond to light. Think about this. A houseplant on a windowsill grows toward light. If you rotate the plant, it will soon reorient its growth until its leaves again face the window. The growth of a plant toward light is called phototropism. In a forest or other natural ecosystem where plants may be crowded, phototropism directs growing seedlings toward the sunlight that powers photosynthesis. Some of the earliest experiments on phototropism were conducted in the late 19th century by Charles Darwin and his son, Francis. The Darwins observed that a grass seedling could bend toward light only if the tip of the shoot was present. The tip was removed, the shoot would not curve toward light. The seedling would also fail to grow toward light if the tip was covered with an opaque cap. The Darwins proposed the hypothesis that some signal was transmitted downward from the tip into the part of the stem that controlled growth. Later experiments by other scientists studying phototropism led to the discovery of chemical messengers that stimulated growth in the stem. These chemical messengers were hormones.
I hate to say it, but probably the best thing that could happen right now is a little consolidation, because one of the reasons that we have so many news sources out there is because up until recently, the local newspaper in everybody's town was the only newspaper they got, pretty much. Well, now if you're consuming news online, then what's the difference between the local newspaper that I read in Kentucky versus the one that the guy reads in Dallas or the one that somebody reads out in North Dakota? And it turns out that if you did a comparison, and I'm just making this figure up, but I'm going to guess that it's about 90% similar stuff. I mean, when you take out high school football scores, restaurant reviews, and local social gatherings, and you just have regional and national stuff in there, you really can get that stuff from anywhere. And so I think what's happened is a lot of these newspapers and local TV stations don't realize that now they're all in direct competition with not only each other, but the nationals as well.
You might picture Neanderthals as cavemen gnawing on bones around a campfire, which wouldn't be inaccurate. But Neanderthals may have also dined on roasted vegetables and known a bit about medicinal plants, too. So says a study in the journal Naturwissenschaften, the science of nature. Researchers analyzed hardened dental plaque from 5 Neanderthals found in El Cedrón cave in northern Spain. Yes, 50,000-year-old dental plaque. And they found a lot lurking between the teeth, like evidence of nuts, grasses, and green veggies, chemical traces of wood smoke, and tiny, intact starch granules, proof Neanderthals ate their carbs. In one individual, they detected compounds from the medicinal herbs chamomile and yarrow. The herbs have no nutritional value, and since Neanderthals did have the gene to detect the herb's bitter taste, the researchers speculate that the cave dwellers were munching on them not as food, but to self-medicate. Not too far-fetched, they say, because primates like chimps also use medicinal plants. Luckily for the scientists doing this detective work, Neanderthals may have known a thing or two about medicine, but they didn't get regular checkups at the dentist.
You just bought peanut butter. You chose the jar because, well, you've always eaten the crunchy variety. In reality, however, something else may have influenced your choice. The product you picked was centrally located on the store shelves. Researchers tracked the eye movements of 67 subjects as they scanned a 3x3 matrix of fictitious brands. The tracking found that consumers tend to focus on objects in the middle, specifically 5 seconds before they made their choice. And they did this for all kinds of products, from vitamins to online movies. Also, subjects continue to go for the centrally located brand even if the product was not in the middle of their specific visual field. So it's not in reference to one's view. It is literally about the product being central within the entire shelf layout. Past studies have shown that people tend to make a lot of choices based on central locations, like choosing the middle bathroom stall in a public washroom, a middle seat at a table, or even the middle items in a series of arbitrary objects. The test consumers had no conscious awareness that they had chosen centrally located brands. Makes you wonder what you've taken home without realizing why. Ronald Cotton went to prison for rape. The victim picked him from a lineup, convinced she was accurate. She picked him again years later when his case was reopened. This second lineup included the actual rapist. After 11 years behind bars, Cotton was later exonerated by DNA evidence. Experts say that the current lineup format pressures witnesses to identify a suspect even when they lack confidence. So researchers are trying to improve the accuracy of such identifications. One recent study had more than 900 participants watch a short film of a staged crime. Up to a week after watching the film, the viewers looked at photos of suspects one at a time and rated how confident they were about each one's guilt. Half of the participants could take as long as they wanted to look at the photos. The other half had to decide within a few seconds. And this fast group was up to 66% more accurate. The study is in the Journal of Psychological Science. Strong memories are accessed more quickly than weak memories, which may explain why choosing fast tends to mean choosing right. Another factor that's putting the standard police lineup itself on trial.
Now, let's consider two types of mistakes that can occur when a manager actually starts to set up a duplicate system to replicate a successful process. Firstly, perhaps he forgets that he was just trying to copy another process and starts trying to improve on it. Another mistake is trying to use the best parts of various different systems in the hope of creating the perfect combination. Unfortunately, attempts like these usually turn out to be misguided and lead to problems. Why? Well, for various reasons. Perhaps there weren't really any advantages after all, because the information wasn't accurate. Or perhaps the business settings weren't really comparable. More typically, the advantages are real enough, but there are also disadvantages that have been overlooked. For example, modification might compromise safety in some way. So what's the solution? Well, I don't intend to suggest that it's easy to get things right the second time. It's not. But the underlying problem has more to do with attitudes than the actual difficulty of the task, and there are ways of getting it right. These involve adjusting attitudes, being more realistic and cautious, really. As an immigrant to North America, you will need to ensure that employers and organizations such as colleges and universities properly recognize your international credentials. These may be trade certificates, but also educational qualifications such as degrees or diplomas that you have completed or partially completed. It is common for hiring personnel to have little or no training in evaluating an academic background earned outside of North America. But at the same time, employers see formal education as very important when hiring. Research has shown that sometimes immigrants start with a lower salary than people who have completed their training in North America. If you need to complete your training in North America, apprenticeships leading to skilled trades are in high demand.
Art therapy can be defined as a form of psychotherapy which uses art as its main means of communication. Patients needn't have any particular talent in art, since the art therapist is not concerned with making an assessment of what the patient produces. The principal aim of this kind of therapy is to facilitate the patient's well-being in order to bring change and growth on a personal level through the use of art materials. Obviously, as always, the relationship between the therapist and the patient is important, but art therapy differs from other psychological therapies because it's a process between the patient, the therapist, and the art. So what we found is the expressive nature of this therapy is particularly successful with those who have difficulty expressing themselves verbally.
The theory of personality types suggests there are pairs of what are known as type preferences. Type preferences are not the same as character traits that can be worked on and changed. Rather, they're preferred ways of being in the world, different ways of experiencing daily life. One well-known pair of type preferences is extraversion-introversion. Some people are extroverts and some are introverts. Extroverted people are by nature continuously aware of events outside of themselves. Extroverts turn outward to the world around them to pick up ideas, values, and interests. Extroverts, therefore, usually have a variety of interests and sort of take an active approach to life. Introversion is just the opposite. Introverts look inward for resources. Introverts pursue fewer interests, but on a much deeper level. They sort of take a reflective approach to life. What I mean is, they involve themselves in inner events, ideas, and impressions. Introverted people usually prefer to learn in private.
The Chinese were, as far as we know, the inventors of paper money, and, because it was so easy to move around compared with coins, it was named flying money. They were also the first to experience an economic problem which has become all too familiar. By the 12th century, there was enough money in circulation to cause serious inflation. In Europe, it wasn't until about 1400 that bankers in Spain and Italy began to honour bills of exchange, which were a kind of private paper money not in general use. They were documents used by those involved in a business transaction in which payment was made through a third party to avoid the cost of foreign exchange. However, it is the Swedes who are generally credited with producing the first proper European bank.
It takes a Y chromosome to make a man, but that doesn't mean its counterpart, the X chromosome, plays no part. In fact, it has a big role in making sperm. To study X evolution, researchers first sequenced the human chromosome more accurately than ever before. Then they compared the code to that of a mammal whose evolutionary lineage split from ours about 80 million years ago, the mouse. It turns out that humans and mice share 95% of their X genes. This finding was no surprise. In the 1960s, biologist Susumu Ono suggested the X chromosome would evolve slowly and thus remain similar in most mammalian species. But some things did change over evolutionary time, or rather 144 things. 144 human X chromosome genes had no counterparts in mice, and these genes seemed to be constantly developing. Many of the genes remain dormant in females, only becoming active in tissues involved in sperm production. The study is in the journal Nature Genetics. Clearly, the X chromosome exceeds its feminine responsibilities, which is excellent news for male fertility. Music, film, and video game makers face a new online digital world, and some are testing a revolutionary pricing system, pay what you want. But a new study finds that when consumers can name their own price, many opt out of buying at all. The study is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. For the research, tour boat passengers posed for photos. Each boat ride announced a price of $15 per picture, but they then charged either $15, $5, or the option to pay what you want. As expected, the fewest tourists purchased photos when they had to pay full price, but more customers bought photos when they cost $5 than when prices were pay what you want, which could have saved passengers even more. The researchers suggest that choosing to pay less than an announced, lower than expected price made people feel cheap. With choices then limited to spending more money or feeling like a tightwad, potential customers simply opted out of the purchase. So on sea or land, a low set price may catch the most fish.
Three separate sources are not enough for assessment. Equality has not yet been achieved in this society. Fashion trends help to make people's life interesting.